We're talking a little bit about hellfire and brimstone this morning. And so I wanted to put myself through a simulation. So last night before I went to bed, about 11 o'clock, I had a whole bag of Flamin' Hot Cheetos. And it was a long night, church. Kept waking up, and, acid reflux is not fun, but when it's Flamin' Hot Cheetos, it's even worse. So feeling a little bit, not great this morning, but I know what it's like to live in Sodom and Gomorrah a little bit. Actually, the only reason I shared that is because Jacob said he would give me some money if I had worked Flamin' Hot Cheetos into the sermon this morning, so I win. All right. All right, so here's what I actually want to open with talking about. I want to tell you guys a story, and this is not like the thing that I am most proud of in my life, all right? When I was in elementary school, at this time I was probably 9, 10 years old, something like that. Me and my buddy Eric, we kind of got into a lot of trouble together. And so, we weren't really following Christians. And across the street from his house was a Jehovah's Witness church. And Eric told me, I'd never heard of a Jehovah's Witness before. I didn't know what that was. And he goes, it's a cult, which is kind of funny because he was Mormon. So I don't even know. It was an interesting thing. So anyway, so he said that we had, if we're going to, be on God's side, we have to go, attack the church, right? So he was so he had an orange tree. And he said, we're going to get oranges, and we're going to throw them across the street at the cars in the parking lot, and if we can really throw it, we'll hit the side of the church. And it was okay, all right, well, we'll do this in the name of the Lord, okay? So that's what we decided to do. Now, little kids out there, I'm not telling you what to do. This is a do as I say, not as I do moment, all right? I found out that, little Lydia was listening to the sermon, and she learned a couple of lessons today, and one of them is that she doesn't want to throw oranges at churches. So basically, we think, okay, this is going to be awesome. So we're throwing oranges. We're 9, 10 years old, and we were throwing them, and then all of a sudden we heard this guy's voice go, "Hey!" And we're like, oh, okay, we're caught. And we kind of laughed, and we were hiding. And we kind of figured that eventually somebody would come out and yell, and then we'd just be done. But we didn't count on the fact that he was going to come running at us from across the street. So we freaked out, and we didn't know what to do. And I turn around, and Eric's gone. I'm like, where'd he go? I turn around, he's hightailing it the other direction, and I'm in the middle, okay. And so I took off running too, and so we're sprinting, and he had this really big front yard. And we're sprinting down, and at the other end of the yard, they had parked their ski boat and left it up, against the fence. So we were running with everything we had, and they couldn't see us because we were around the corner. And we jumped up into the boat and pulled the cover over us, and we just sat there, and we were terrified. And I started praying. God, please don't let me get in trouble. If you don't make me get in trouble right now, I swear I will read the Bible every day. I will go to church every day. I will do whatever I need to do. Just please don't let me get in trouble right now. So we hid under there for probably 15, 20 minutes. And then Eric was like, I think he's gone. So we came out of the back of the boat, and we looked around. He was gone. And it was all right, well, now we're going to we told God we were going to do whatever he wanted. So he's like, I got a better idea. Let's go climb that tree. We'll pull down walnuts and start throwing those at the cars that are driving by. So we did that instead. All right? So question. Have you ever been in a situation where you start promising to God that if you get out of it, you'll do whatever he wants, right? You're sick, right? You had too much to drink or something the night before, or you're in trouble, or maybe a loved one is sick or dying, right? And then it's God, if you can just rescue me from this, I swear I'll read my Bible every day, I'll pray every day, I'll do whatever has anybody ever done that before? Where you plead with God? Okay, most of you are just going to lie and not raise your hands. Okay, all right, that's cool. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I've done this several times in my life, and the sad thing is, as a kid, as I was growing up and stuff, I'd always make these promises to God, I'll do this if you do that, and then I would get what I asked for, and then I'd go right back to doing whatever it was that I was doing before. There was no sincerity in my repentance and my desire to seek after God, right? That wouldn't come till much later when I was an adult, all right? Well, we're going to see a little bit of that today with Lot, right? He's just been rescued by God. Right? Pulled from the depths of the worst thing you can imagine, and yet the decisions he makes after this are not so great. So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. If you're going to follow along with your YouVersion Bible app this morning, you want to know the title of today's message, just look for the message called A Lot of Trouble, Part 2. All right? We're going to be in Genesis chapter 19, going through verses 23 through 38. So just to give you guys a little bit of a recap in case you missed part 1 and even the message before that. A couple weeks ago, Abraham learned that God was going to be judging Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so the Lord came with two angels, all right, and they kind of split up. The two angels went to Sodom and Gomorrah. They were going to examine the city to see if God was going to cast judgment on the city, all right? So the Lord stayed behind with Abraham, and they had a conversation. And Abraham asked God, are you going to destroy the city if there's righteous people in the city? And after a little bit of bartering, God finally said at the end of the bartering, if there are even 10 righteous people in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, I won't destroy them. All right, and so that was the end of that conversation. So last week, the angels get to the city gate and they see Lot. And Lot is like, hey, come over to my house. They're like, no, we're going to stay here. He's like, no, please. So they end up going with Lot to his house. When the angels are with Lot in his house, this angry mob descends on the house and they start banging on the door. And it's like, hey, send them out because they actually wanted to sexually assault these angels. All right, the whole city wanted to do that. And of course, Lot messes up and he says, no, take my daughters instead. And then they say, okay, well, we're going to give it to you even worse then, Lot. And so the angels pull him in, they strike the mob blind, and then the angels turn to everyone in the house. And it's like, obviously the city is sinful. So they're like, okay, you guys need to go because God's judgment is coming. Well, Lot's sons-in-law think that he's joking, so they stick around. But then the angels grab Lot and his wife by the hand. The other angel grabs his two daughters, and they run out of the city, and they're like, go hide in the hills because God's judgment is coming. And Lot goes, I don't really want to go to the hills. Can I go to that other city instead, to Zoar? And God's like, fine, go hide in Zoar, but hurry up because I'm not going to do any damage to these cities until I know you're safe. And that's where we ended last week, okay? So let's go ahead and hop in here to Genesis 19:23, and we'll see what happens next. Okay, verse 23. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the valley and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. This was the other thing that little Lydia mentioned to me this morning. She was like, wait, so if I play tag and somebody's chasing me and I turn around, am I going to turn into salt? Like the poor little thing was like terrified she was going to turn into salt. So little kids, you will not turn into salt, okay? Don't worry about that. That's not what's going on in the story, okay? Here's what is going on. God's judgment came on the cities, all right? Sulfur and fire rained down on Sodom and Gomorrah, or the more familiar term that we hear is when, like, preachers are banging on the pulpit or whatever, is hellfire and brimstone. Okay, that's the words that we normally hear. Now, brimstone is a medieval English word that means burning stone. Okay, essentially what this is in the area of Sodom and Gomorrah around the Dead Sea, there are these rocks that are sulfuric, and you can actually just hold them in your hand and just light them on fire, right? And you probably don't want to leave it in your hand after you light it on fire, but it's a rock that just has a lot of sulfur in it. You can light it on fire, okay? So I actually have a video here. This is sulfur burning. That is in Wyoming at a landfill. They built a landfill right over an old sulfur mine, and so something lit fire. And so this is basically just sulfuric rock burning. So I thought it'd be kind of cool to show that because it might give you an idea of what Sodom and Gomorrah looked like once God brought fire down from heaven. So it's kind of interesting. It's really kind of beautiful to look at, actually. But anyway, so that gives you kind of an idea of what burning sulfur might look like. Now, there's a lot of interesting archaeological evidence around the Dead Sea. All right, I'm going to nerd out just a little bit on you guys here. Some people think that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah with a volcano, but the problem is there's not really a lot of evidence of volcanic activity around the Dead Sea. The closest thing is up in Syria, where there was there was some volcanic activity around this time that they know about. And then there were some lava flows that came down north of the Dead Sea, but we're pretty sure Sodom and Gomorrah was on the southeast portion of the Dead Sea. So we're talking a really big span, so it probably wasn't really volcanic activity. So some people think that it was an earthquake. And Sodom was actually known for these bitumen pits, like asphalt pits all around Sodom. In Genesis 14:10, it actually talks about these pits. It says, now in the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country, okay? So if there's like these really big pits of asphalt, like burning tar, right, they think that maybe an earthquake came, destroyed the city, and then created a channel where these pits would flow this hot tar into the city and maybe even shoot it into the air so that it would come down on the city. So some people think that that's what it was talking about. Some people think that God did this with a flood, and they think that basically the Dead Sea was kind of filled up with water, and they think that this water came in and just completely engulfed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. So they've been underwater for centuries. But now that the Dead Sea water line is kind of dropping, they're kind of examining the southeast portions of the Dead Sea there, and they're not really finding anything. So it doesn't really seem like it was just a flood that took them out. Plus, who would, if you saw a flood come in, you wouldn't be like, oh, hellfire and brimstone, right? You're expecting something different. So the most popular natural explanation for what could have happened to Sodom and Gomorrah is something called a meteoritic airburst. Okay, and there's something that in relatively modern times that we have seen before. It's called the Tunguska event. Okay, and what basically happened was way back in 1908 in June, a 50-yard-long meteor entered Earth's atmosphere going about 34,000 miles an hour, okay? And as it was hurtling towards Russia, it was releasing this burning gas, and finally it exploded about 5 miles above the Tunguska forest. And it was 1,000 times more powerful than Hiroshima, than the bomb there, and it torched 80 million trees in an area half the size of Rhode Island instantly. So you can kind of see in the pictures there that you can still see this kind of hole in the forest even 100 plus years later, right? And you can see a picture there of the trees just totally, every tree is just blown out to its side. And then that's just kind of an artist's rendition. So you can imagine, that would have been a pretty incredible event to see, right? Now, this didn't kill anybody. This was back, this is in a forested area where nobody really lived or anything. So it didn't hurt anybody. But a lot of scholars think that this is what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. That a smaller meteor came in and exploded about 1 kilometer over Sodom, and it just wiped out these two cities with ease. There's actually a site called Tal El Hammam that some people think might be the ancient Sodom. So when they start digging, they found this ancient layer of soil that is just full of vast amounts of ash. Even with centuries of erosion, it's still a ton of ash under there. They found pottery shards that have been melted into glass. They found zircon crystals that have been melted, which requires a temperature of 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. They have also found mud brick structures that their foundations were scorched and the mud brick stuff on top was just blown off across the field, right? So there's evidence in this region of a very powerful, significant event archaeologically, all right? Now I'll tell you this. I don't know if Sodom and Gomorrah was done with a volcano. I don't know if it was an earthquake, a flood, a meteor, all of those things. Or if God just miraculously manifested hellfire and brimstone over the city and blew it apart just with no natural explanation. I don't know how God did it, but I know this. God did it. This was God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. This is what he did. And this must have been terrifying. A magnificent display of God's power. I mean, look at that thing. Can you imagine sitting there and looking up in the sky and that's what you see coming down at you? I mean, that would be horrifying, right? The last seconds of your life, pretty sure I'm going to die, right? It would have been terrifying for these people. And this should tell us that God really doesn't like sin. He really doesn't like it. And so the angels are warning Lot and his family, hey, don't look back. Run away. Don't look back. And so Lot's wife actually turns around and she becomes a pillar of salt. Okay? Now, some people think that she actually lingered behind, or maybe she even left Sodom and turned around and was headed back towards Sodom when this happened, maybe. But I can tell you this was a result of her heart. Right? Scripture says that she looked here, and that word look in the Hebrew is nabat. It means to look intently at, by implication, to regard with pleasure, favor, or care. Right? So she turned around. She was fleeing the sinful city, knowing God's destruction was coming, but she turned back with longing. She wanted to go back to the lifestyle. She wanted to go back to the sinful community that she had been a part of. Now, we don't know a whole lot about Lot's wife. Jewish tradition says that her name might have been Edith, but we really don't know. We don't know her ethnicity. Right? So she might have married Lot back in Ur of the Chaldeans and came with Abraham over here, or Lot may have come down and met her in Sodom, so she would be a Sodomite, and then they would have gotten married there. So we really don't know. Either one of those is a possibility. What we do know about Lot's wife, though, is that she was rescued by God, She was told not to turn back, but she did anyway, and she was destroyed. That's what we know about Lot's wife. Here's your first fill in the blank, church. If you grabbed your Connect card on the way in, you're going to fill in your blanks. Here's your first one. When God rescues you, don't look back. When God rescues you, don't look back. And this is a reminder for all of us. You know, there's actually a formation near the Dead Sea. That's it right there on the left-hand side. That's called Lot's wife, is what that thing is called. So, now, I mean, if you look at it, you might go, okay, I mean, that could be Lot's wife, right? I mean, it kind of looks personish. I mean, it could be. The problem is that thing's 66 feet tall. So, I don't know how tall Lot's wife was, but I'm guessing not 66 feet tall, okay? So, but really, like the locals in the area, when they look at that, what they do is they remind themselves, like, don't do what Lot's wife did. Don't make the mistake of turning away from God and turning back to your old sinful life. Don't do that. And so that's the reminder that we're supposed to have, okay? As a matter of fact, that's what Jesus told us in Luke 17:32. Jesus said, remember Lot's wife. Whoever seeks to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will keep it. Now, that idea of your life there is talking about like your old sinful life. Like if you're seeking to hang on to your old life, you will die. But if you let your old life go, if you are crucified to your old self and you cling to Christ, then you will have life, okay? So Jesus reminds us with Lot's wife, don't make the mistake she made turning back to your old sinful life. If we preserve our old ways, we will be destroyed, okay? So instead, what we should do is when God rescues us from our sin, we don't look back and long for those days of sin, right? Remembering how it used to be, the good old bad days or whatever. Like we flee from sin and we keep running. We need to look forward to our deliverance and not just looking back at a world that's passing away and has nothing for you. All sin is going to do to you is ruin you and make you salty, which I thought was funny. Okay. Genesis 19:27. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. So now the destruction is done, okay? The cities are decimated. And Abraham comes over the hill to take a look at what God had done. All right? Now, before this happened, I don't know if you realize this, but Sodom and Gomorrah was a beautiful place originally. If you remember way back when Lot chose to divide from Abraham, right when they came around, it was like, we don't have enough land, we're going to split up. And Abraham said, all right, Lot, choose where you want to go. Lot said this in Genesis 13:10. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So what Scripture is saying there is that back in the day, the area around the Dead Sea where Sodom and Gomorrah was beautiful and fertile. It was like the Garden of Eden. It doesn't look anything like that today, church. One of the possible locations for Sodom is a dig site called Baba Dra. And basically, if you go there, it looks like this. I mean, that's what the area around the Dead Sea looks like. Just dead, open desert. There's nothing there. Does that look like a fertile valley to you? But that's what it's described as, is before Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, it was a beautiful place. As a matter of fact, the archaeologists that go to this dig site, you can find these old burn pits, like cooking pits where people would have cooked their food, and they take the old 4,000-year-old ashes, and they do this thing called flotation. What you do is you pour all this black stuff into a tub, you mix it with water, you agitate it, and then stuff starts floating to the top. Whatever floats to the top is likely old organic material. So what they do is when they do this, they start sieving off the organic material and they sort it and they look for geometric or what's it called when it's like the same on both sides? Symmetry. Symmetrical, yeah, symmetrical shapes. So they're looking for that kind of stuff, and when they find it, usually it's some kind of a food. Right? So they found all sorts of stuff in there when they do this. They found barley, wheat, linseed, and this little black thing in this guy's fingers here, that's actually a 4,000-year-old cooked fig. It's a fig. Now, when you look at what it looks like all around that area, do you see any fig trees? Where were these dig sites? Where were these people getting figs from? Well, they got the figs because it used to be a beautiful, fertile area. right? There were figs everywhere because everything was lush and beautiful and wet. And then God enacted his judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah and destroyed everything. And even now, it's still dead there. It's called the Dead Sea, right? I mean, can you imagine for a second what Abraham must be thinking? Right? He was used to this beautiful, lush area, and all of a sudden he comes over the hill and it's like everything is dead and gone and flattened and burning. Can you imagine if something like this happened and you went up to like over there like Fond du Lac Hill or whatever, and you look across at Peoria and Peoria is decimated and all the farmland is just like dead ground now? You'd be like, what happened? Right? I mean, it would be shocking to see that. The building's gone, the people dead, the landscape ruined. Right? So Abraham's probably like, what just happened? But there's good news that goes along with this. The good news is that Lot and his daughters are still alive. Now, we don't know for sure whether or not Abraham knew that, but I kind of think he did, because by the time they wrote this story, right, somebody knew that Lot lived. So I'm thinking that Abraham probably found out. I'm sure God told him that Lot would be rescued. And at some point, here's your next fill in the blank here. And here's what we need to know about what we just saw. Sin leaves destruction, but grace brings hope. Okay, sin leaves destruction, but grace brings hope. Sodom and Gomorrah did nothing but bring sin into the world and ruin the world. And God's actions actually stopped them in their tracks, right? So thank God their sin couldn't continue on, but here's the thing. It also brought destruction with it. The thing God had to do to them also brought destruction. And so that land has never been fertile again. Think about the work that it took to build that city. The men and women that built everything they did. It was a waste because it was decimated. Think about the art and the culture and the music and the history and everything that went on in Sodom and Gomorrah that was lost because they turned to sin and they were destroyed. See, but God also shows us hope in this situation because Lot was spared and he was given a chance to start over. Right? He was rescued, he was preserved, and he was sent so that he could have something new. And so the reality is, if we look at ourselves, we can easily see ourselves in that picture, right? When we sin, we also bring our own destruction. Think about the things that we might have done. Maybe you have done sin that actually had physical damage to it, right? Maybe your drinking caused a car accident. Maybe your anger put holes in the wall. Or maybe your vandalism wrecked somebody's property. But more than likely, whether you caused physical damage or not, you probably did damage to the people around you. Like, think about relationships that you might have damaged. Think about issues that you may have given someone else that they have to deal with the rest of their life. Maybe you have hurt people beyond repair. Well, fortunately, God gives us a chance at hope. And that hope might be for you or for the people that you've hurt. The question really is this, church. When God rescues you, what do you do with that new life? When God rescues you, what do you give with your new chance? Well, let's find out what Lot and his daughters do with their new chance. Genesis 19:30. Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father." What? That's what they did with their second chance? Now, honestly, I don't know how surprised you are. If you've been reading this chapter along with us, right, we've seen rape, homosexuality, and now incest. It's like you may as well add it to the list, I guess, right? I mean, Lot's daughters just want to give him some quaaludes and have their way with him? Like, that's where we're at now? They literally believe that because they're in a cave, no one exists on the whole earth anymore that could possibly give them offspring. Which is weird because they were just in Zoar. Weren't there people there? I mean, you would think so. But now they're in a cave and it's like, oh, we're done. And so here's the truth, is that these two daughters are probably panicked. They're probably overwhelmed and they're probably desperate. They're in a not good place, okay? That's why they're making bad decisions. Here's the thing. If you're in a panic and you're overwhelmed and you're desperate, are those good states of mind to be in when you make big decisions, like who you're going to have babies with? You should probably give it some time and think it out, right? I mean, what does Scripture tell us? Proverbs 4:26. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. In other words, think about what you're going to do, and you'll do less dumb things. Right? Think about it. These girls aren't thinking. They're just reacting with fear and panic and all these other things. Now, question. Are they innocently trying to do the right thing here? Are they in a desperate situation and they're making a bad choice, but do they think they're doing the right thing? Maybe, but I don't think so. Here's why. Here's your next fill in the blank. If you have to lie, it's probably not a good idea. If you have to lie, it's probably not a good idea. They don't sit down and have a rational conversation with their dad. Father, we need to populate the earth here. What should we do? Like, there's no rational conversation. They sneak behind his back, get him inebriated, and then do their thing. They're sneaking around. They're hiding it. They're lying about it. Proverbs 12:20 tells us, deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but those who plan peace have joy. So, church, this is actually a good test for all of us. If you're really trying to do the right thing with someone, you probably won't have to lie about it. Okay, so let's watch this play out. Let's see what happens. Genesis 19:33. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day, the firstborn said to the younger, behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also, then you go in and lie with him. That way we may preserve offspring from our father. Wow. So it's one thing to plan it, it's another thing to actually go through with it, right? So she actually went through with it. The older sister did something really dumb, right? But now it's going to get worse because now she's trying to talk her sister into it, right? She's getting her sister involved. And this situation is now quickly spiraling out of control, okay? Think about it. Think about what sin has done here, right? It's like you begin with this idea of like Sodom and their sin, and then you're going to try to like change God's mind, and then you're going to go off to a city you shouldn't be in, and then you're going to bring a bunch of wine with you, you're going to get drunk. There's all these things going on here, and it's just spiraling out of control. Ian DeGuid said this, like a whirlpool, sin has a powerful vortex effect. Before we know it, we find ourselves in over our heads. And getting out is so much harder than getting in. That's the thing, church, is as they keep making worse and worse decisions, they're getting themselves further and further in. Here's your next fill in the blank, what you need to know. Sin likes to reproduce and spread. Okay, they're making a decision here about something that they can never go back on. Once they make this action, they can't go back on it. Once they're pregnant, they're not returning the return to sender, right? This is a permanent decision. And you know, Jesus mentions to us that faith is like a mustard seed, right? You take a little bit of faith, a little bit of this small seed, and it grows into this huge tree. But honestly, sin works that same way. Take a little bit of sin and let it do what it wants to do, and it will also explode into a giant tree on you. And for them, they're actually kind of starting off with a pretty big sin to begin with. So the older sister is now trying to get the younger one to engage in the same mistake that she made, okay? Jesus talks to us about like how it's one thing for us to sin, it's another thing to drag someone into it with you. Mark 9:42, whoever causes one of these little ones to believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. If you're causing other people to stumble, it's better for you to be drowned at sea with a millstone around your neck. Church, we should be doing everything we can to abstain from sin ourselves, but we should be trying even that much harder not to teach sin to other people. Parents, think about what you're teaching your children. They're watching you. They will duplicate what they see you do. Business owners, if you have employees that work for you, do you foster a culture where your employees feel like they have to lie on tests or they have to lie on reports or whatever in order to do better? I mean, you don't want to encourage sin in something that you're in control over. Whatever you influence, it's crucial that you let Christ be at the center of whatever it is that you do. Okay, now let's go ahead and finish up this story here, 1935. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. There's something amazing that I see here in this part of the story. Here's your last fill in the blank. Sinful environments have long-term consequences. Okay, think about everything we've read here and how much sin is actually involved in what's taking place, right? First of all, Lot's daughters grew up in Sodom. What do you think they learned growing up in Sodom? Parents, do you think it matters what you expose your kids to? Do your kids absorb everything they see? I remember when Ronnie was little, he was probably 2 or 3 years old, he came walking out of his room and he goes, "Hi, I'm John Lasseter, creator of Toy Story." Because he was watching all the Easter eggs and stuff at the end of a Toy Story DVD. And he repeated the line, "Hi, I'm John Lasseter." Right? Little kids, they absorb everything you say. Let me ask you this. Growing up in Sodom, do you think incest was a big deal in a place like Sodom? It was probably pretty normalized there. Think about what your kids see on social media, on TV, and the songs that they listen to. There's no way that sinful influences, wow, that's hard to say. Sinful influences don't normalize sin. There's no way that happens. If you're surrounded by sin all the time, it just becomes normal. Now, I'm not saying we all need to live in Christian bubbles, but our view of sin matters. What we teach our kids matters. What we teach other people matters. Lot didn't have to move to Sodom, but he chose to anyway, and his girls learned the culture. Secondly, it's ironic that Lot's daughters violated him sexually. Isn't that exactly what Lot offered them up to the mob? Take my daughters and do what you want, and now they did it to him. Like father, like daughters, right? And thirdly, they're all getting wasted together up in this cave on multiple nights, okay? In the midst of fleeing this supernatural disaster, you found plenty of time to grab a couple cases of wine to take with you. And then Lot gets so drunk with his daughters, so drunk that he doesn't even know when they laid down and when they got up and what happened in between. Is that a good idea? And he did it twice in a row. Then you add the incest on top of that. Why not? You've come this far. And it doesn't end there. The girls get pregnant. They start nations of their own. And those very nations cause problems for God's chosen people for centuries after that. That's the result of sin, church. It just wants to grow and continue to spread. William Farley said this: sin destroys everything it touches. It destroys the glory of God. It distorts individual happiness. It corrupts families. It divides churches. It is like rat poison. It smells and looks good, but it ultimately kills its victim. Although sin often brings short-term pleasure, if not atoned for, it terminates in infinite pain. So from everything we know about Lot, his story is a tale of ruin and tragedy, right? This is the end of Lot's story as far as we know. We don't see him anymore in Abraham's story. This is it. End of the line for Lot from what we know. Matter of fact, some Jewish scholars think that Abraham intentionally never saw Lot again. Because of what Lot had done and what his daughters had done, Abraham was like, "I'm staying away from you." But there's one thing here that I don't want to forget, okay? If you learn anything from the story of Lot, first of all, learn not to duplicate his behavior. But if you learn anything else, learn who God is in this story. Learn that God has the power to defeat sin, like he did in Sodom and Gomorrah. Learn that God has wild compassion. You think God didn't know what Lot was going to do? And yet he chose to rescue him anyway. Learn that God has the power to radically transform us even if we're messed up. What's interesting to me is in 2 Peter, Peter is writing about Lot. And listen to what he says about him in 2 Peter 2:7. "And if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard." Okay, a couple thousand years after Lot, Peter's talking about him, and what word does he use 3 times to describe Lot? Righteous, righteous, righteous. How can you take a guy like Lot and say he's righteous? How could you possibly do that? Honestly, church, there's only one way. Through the lens of the power of God. It's the only way to do it. And honestly, that's how we have to view ourselves too. As it turns out, believe it or not, you are more to God than just a list of the mistakes that you've made. Right? It turns out those things you've done are nothing compared to the power of God. The mistakes you've made have been destroyed by the power of God. God has the power to transform and heal you if you're willing to let him do it. And that's what I encourage you to think about this week. Jess Kilgallen pointed something out to me at the end of first service. She said, the Moabites, right, this evil thing that, was a thorn in the side of of Israel for a long time. I don't know if you know this, but when you go through Jesus' genealogy, there's a lady named Ruth who came, and she was a Moabite. Part of the way that Jesus came into the world. So if God can use the evil of Sodom and Gomorrah, if he can use the evil of Lot, if he could use the evil of the Moabites all the way up through time in order to bring us salvation, please tell me what it is that God can't do for us. There's nothing, church. There's nothing we have to be afraid of. God can take care of anything, and he can transform anything you've done. Believe it or not, no matter how much you've messed up your life, at any point when you give your life to Christ, you can actually be called righteous. And I would encourage you this week, church, as you go out, that that's what you would reflect on. Like, yeah, I've messed up. I have a list of mistakes behind me. I've thrown oranges at churches, the whole list of stuff. But God can call me his righteous child because I know Jesus. And I would encourage you to seek him if you don't already know him this morning, church.